ripped apart the erg to let the Yam Squad know what resistance on bay is all about. Hello YouTubers and welcome to another episode. Today, as you can tell from the title, we're talking about the drag factor, we're talking about the resistance on one of these machines. It's probably one of the most asked questions that I get on the channel. What is your drag factor? What's your resistance? What resistance should I use on the machine to get the fastest score possible? So what we're going to do today is I'm going to take the fan cover off here and just show you how it works. And then hopefully that'll explain a little bit of the drag factor to you so that you can get the best drag factor for yourself to get the best scores on one of these machines for you. So what I'm going to do is basically just a few screws here, and this is actually part of the sort of maintenance of one of these machines. Let me know in the comments below if you would like a separate video of how to replace different parts in this machine or just general maintenance tips. But now I will get this cover off. So now I've taken off the fan cover itself, and this is the fan cover. As you can see in the erg here, there's not actually too much going on, and one of the things you can do is clean this bit out, but again, that's for another video. The fan cover itself, this is where the drag factor, the resistance comes into play. So moving this part here will change the drag factor, it will change the resistance. Hopefully I can kind of show you guys how it looks here. So if you start on this bit here, so I am on drag factor 1 right here, and if you can see the gaps in here are quite small. If I start to increase the resistance, it increases the gaps between all these rings here. So it lets more air in to the fan that is here. And that is where the resistance comes into play. That is where you feel like it's harder to push when you've got a higher drag factor. But really, the resistance itself, when you think about a weight stack, if you say you start on the top of the weight stack, say you're doing some rows. You start on the top and it's at 2 kilos and it's really easy to pull it. When you go to the bottom of the rack, say it's 150 kilos, it's really, really difficult to pull. That's not what goes on here on a rowing machine. The resistance itself is basically dictated by how hard you push. The drag factor basically has nothing to do with the resistance. The drag factor, or the resistance changed by this here doodad, changes the amount of air that the fan can suck in when the fan is going. And so what that does is creates a drag on the fan, and then creates either, if you have a low drag factor, it means there's not a lot of drag in the fan and the fan can keep going. When you're not pushing, it slows the fan down less. When you've got a high drag factor, the fan is slowed down more because there's more air being sucked in and therefore more air resistance to slow down the fan. The reason it feels more difficult to push when you've got a higher drag factor is because the fan slows down that much more in between your strokes, in between your push phase, and therefore you're starting the next stroke, the next part where you're close to the monitor here, with the fan being slower, so you have to then start the fan going up again, rather than if you have a low resistance, a low drag factor, the fan won't slow down as much. Therefore, when you do get to the catch position, the push point of the stroke, you don't have to start the fan up from a slow point, depending on where your resistance is. So hopefully that does make sense, because I've seen so many questions on my channel about what drag factor, what resistance do I need to get a good score, when in reality, it is nothing to do with the drag factor or the resistance. Maybe nothing is a bit too harsh, but the actual scores you get are determined by you. It will feel very different, like I said, because you're picking up the fan either at a slow speed or a fast speed, depending on your resistance. Your scores are determined by your strength, your fitness, your endurance, all of that, and that creates the scores that you get. So this general drag factor that I use when you're looking at the numbers on the side of the erg, I'm sitting usually around 5 or 6. This depends on a few different factors. For me, I've got a relatively new erg. It's only done maybe a couple of million meters. For a rowing machine like this, it'll go on for tens, maybe even hundreds of millions of meters if the maintenance is on point. But when you set your numbers here, say you have a rowing machine, I have a rowing machine. If I set it to 5, my drag factor could be different to your drag factor when it's on 5, because just basically with maintenance of the machine, as wear and tear happens, these gaps can widen, can close, basically because in this fan, dust can come in and make these gaps different. So a reason why you should take the fan off every so often to make sure there's no dust in here so the resistance is relatively consistent. But again, it's not really so much down to this number here. It can vary. So if I tell you I'm on level 6 and then you set it to 6, it could be a different drag factor. What you want to do to set the drag factor properly, and I'm not sure if I can do it on this machine with the cage off, but I will try anyway. We turn the monitor on, we go into more options, we hit display drag factor, and then I'll see if what happens here if I pull the handle without a fan. It should show a very high number. Yeah, there we go. So the fan is going there without a cage, and I'm at a drag factor 193. So that's very similar to actually the level 10 drag factor, but I'm sure if I took a few big strokes, it will settle in probably around 200, which is generally around that number 10 for a new erg. And if for example, put the fan cage back on and covered it with, say, a towel, and reduced the amount of air that's getting sucked into the fan, I'll be getting a drag factor almost half of that number, just because there's very, very little resistance. But that is essentially cheating the system. You want to stick to the numbers on the side of the erg here. So you might have clicked on this video to find out what drag factor was. Hopefully that makes sense. You may have clicked on this video to get a number of what drag factor should I use to get the fastest splits that I could possibly get. And honestly, it is very individual. If we look back at the videos I've put up before with Big Phil Clapp, he generally has the resistance a little bit higher for short distance sprint work because he is seriously strong. And when you're picking up the fan going every single stroke from a really slow point with the high drag factor, you really need a serious amount of strength. And if you're trying to do that on a longer piece, say a 2K, 5K, 10K, it can really wear you out. But then at the same time, if you go too low, if your drag factor is too low, so down at level 1s or even around sort of 100 on the drag factor here, you can't really, it feels like you can't apply as much power because the fan's going so fast. You really have to be really reactive. Your technique has to be on point to catch the fan going so fast. For those of you that have been on the water, and for those of you that haven't, hopefully you can soon, it's that feeling when you're going in a fast boat and you almost have to really, really time it really well because you're going so fast and you can sometimes just miss the catch point. And that's the same thing when you have the drag factor really low. You can sometimes just miss that catch, that push point, and then you're wasting power. So the drag factor that is best is a sort of middle ground of the two. And for me, I've experimented with a slightly lower drag factor and a slightly higher drag factor. If we're talking about the numbers on the screen, I've tried 150, 160, and I've tried 110, 115. It depends what my aims are. So my 2K previously, my PB 549, I rated very high, so I wanted to chip along with the rate. So I didn't want the fan to slow down too much, so I used slightly lower drag factor, slightly lower resistance, around 115, 120. When I'm rating a bit lower, say in around a rate 30, or even a sort of a low rate test, say a 30-minute rate 20, I'll probably like it slightly higher because I am really pushing hard every stroke and I'm getting that recovery time in between. But then again, I don't want it too high because it does slow down the fan, and you really need a serious amount of strength endurance if you're trying to do a long piece with a high drag factor. So that will be the end of the drag factor explanation. Hopefully that clears things up for you all. I think unfortunately it might not be the answer you're looking for. It is genuinely down to you, down to your fitness, and down to your power. If you want a faster score, it's about getting better technique, it's about getting fitter, it's about getting stronger, because on the rowing machine, it's you that generates the resistance, it's not shifting these numbers around that might change that resistance. And now I'm going to put the erg back together. Bay will get a little bit of a clean. Again, let me know in the comments below if you would like to know about more maintenance tips for the rowing machine, because there are a few more that can extend the longevity of your rowing machine, as well as potentially make you go slightly faster. And as always, Yam Squad, remember to subscribe if you haven't already, hit that like button, and I will see you in the next episode.